everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for this week's Power BI edition of Workout Wednesday. My name is Shannon Lindsay, and I will be taking you through this week's solution. I want to start by giving a massive shout out to Lorna Brown, who posted this challenge 2 weeks ago, so in week 11, on the Tableau Workout Wednesday challenge. And I just love this visualization so much that I thought that it would be great if we could recreate it in Power BI. We have not recreated it exactly as is in Tableau. You are welcome to do that if you have the time, but we have done something similar. Let us quickly review the requirements before we jump into the build. So we are going to connect to the data.world curated dataset that Lorna has prepared for us, and we're going to connect to that using the custom connector in Power BI. We are going to bring those tables into Power BI, and we are going to create a data model so that all of our data are related and our visualization is connected and interactive. We're then going to build a bubble chart, which is just a fancy scatter chart or scatter plot that shows life expectancy by average income over time. And then the additional element that makes it a bubble chart rather than a scatter plot is that the size of the bubble is going to show population. From there, we're going to build a page overlay that gives additional information to end users about data that is included in the report. These overlays can be super cool. So essentially they look to users like they are a part of the report, but really it's just a piece of information that you want to tell them, whether it's instructions or more information about what they're seeing in the chart. I think these could have a lot of value. We're then going to have you create a button on your report page that allows users to display the custom overlay. So in this case, you'll see that this question mark here is the button that will take you back to the overlay. And then last but not least, we'll answer the question, are there any countries with an income over 50,000 that has an average life expectancy lower than 74? Let's take a quick peek at the data set here. Lorna has pulled all of our required data into one place. The data sets exist here. And one thing that you may want to note is that the data set name here is Workout Wednesday 2021, week 11. We're going to need to know that because that is the dataset ID, and that's going to help us when we pull the data into Power BI. So let's go ahead and jump in. First thing we're going to do is get our data, and we are going to type into the search bar when this shows up. We are just going to look for data.world. Helps if I spell it right. Here we have our data.world connector. We're going to click connect. And what it's going to ask us for here is the owner and the dataset ID. So I'm just going to jump back to the dataset itself. And I actually like to get this information just straight from the URL. So the owner is the fabulous Lorna Brown, Miss Data Viz. And the dataset ID here is Workout Wednesday 2021. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And as we do, what you're going to see here is a preview of the 4 tables that Lorna has included, which she got, of course, from Gapminder. We're going to go ahead and select all of these. And we are going to click transform. You always want to click this transform data so that you have an opportunity to open up Power Query and transform your data. From here, you will see that we have 4 queries. We're going to go ahead and rename each of these queries, and then we're going to do a little bit of work to each of them. What you can see here is that I have renamed each of my queries, and you can name these in any way that makes sense to you. But what I like to do is to make sure that I have my star schema in mind, and I'm thinking about my fact tables and my dimension tables. So which tables have the data in them versus which tables tell you about the data. And in this case, we have data in our income, our life expectancy, and our population table. And then our dim country table, or the country table, list of countries, tells you information about those countries. And what we know is that each of these fact tables is going to have to be related to the country dimension based upon the country name. But before we can do that, we need to transform this data. So rather than having 242 columns, we're going to go ahead and unpivot this data, and we're going to do that for income, life expectancy, and population. Now, as with any other Microsoft product or any other technology at all, there are a number of different ways that you can do this transformation, that you can relate the data. I am going to do what is the most simple and straightforward, and what also has optimal performance. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the country column, and I am going to unpivot other columns. What this is going to do is it is going to give me two columns side by side. One that contains the year, and the other that contains the value. And in this case, this is income. So I'm going to double click on those and just rename. I'm going to do the exact same thing for life expectancy and population. We are now ready to load this data to the model and create some relationships so that we're able to build. Now you will notice that I didn't just merge all of the tables together into one. Rather, I kept them separate, and that is for a reason. If you want to learn more about star schemas and about how you should model your data, I would highly recommend that you check out the Microsoft documentation, and I will make sure that I link out to that. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to just arrange my tables a little bit. So I'm going to pull my fact tables to the bottom. This is the Rob Colley method of organization, my dimension up at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and create some relationships between the name and the country field. You can also create these relationships by going up to Manage Relationships in the ribbon and adding a new relationship. You select your first table, which in this case is dim country. You select the column that you're going to relate, and then you select the column that it is going to be related to. This is a one-to-many relationship with a single cross-filter direction, and I am going to click OK and close. So you'll notice it's the same thing, just two different ways of doing it. Now we have one additional step that we need to take, and that is we need to add a date dimension. The reason for that is that each of these tables have a year column in them, with the exception of the country dimension. And we need to make sure that when we build our visualization, we're able to filter all of these by year. And there are a number of different ways that you can do this. You can create a date table, a common date table at the data source. You can create a common date table in Power Query using the M language. You can create a common date table using DAX. Or if you have data that you know will not change, I guess theoretically you could also create a manual date table. You will see that what I've done here is I've created a date table that is not a true date table in the real sense of the word. This is more of a listing of years that does not have any duplicates in it. So in order to create your dimension table, again, there's a number of different ways you can do it, but what I've done here is I have taken one of my other tables that I knew had the values in it that I needed, and I have simply created a year column and removed the duplicates. So that's the key step here. There are much better ways to make true date tables, but in this case, all we really needed was a dimension table that had one row for each year, and those do have to be distinct. One other thing that I want to point out here is that you can organize your queries into different folders. This is something that I like to do when I'm building so that I keep things nice and tidy, and it also really helps with collaboration. So the way to do this is to right click and to create a new group. And from here you can create a folder and name it anything you want. Click OK, and then you'll have a new folder, and then you can just drag the queries around in between the folders. So that's a nice trick that I like to use. So we'll go ahead and close and apply, and from here we're going to just make sure that we build those relationships, and then we'll be able to start building our visualizations. Now, Power BI is really smart, and it noticed that I had a year column in each of my fact tables. So it went ahead and created those relationships for us. Okay, let's go ahead and start building our visualization. The first thing that I do want you all to notice is that we as developers have the opportunity to show and hide columns in the different data tables. And so if I right click here and I view hidden, you'll see that I've hidden a bunch of different columns here that we're not going to need to use in our visuals. Now in the real world, out in the wild, if there are columns that you do not need in your data model, you want to go ahead and remove those. But in some cases, there are columns that you as a developer may need, but those who are building the front end of the report might not need to see. So you can go ahead and hide those to clean this up for your end users. Now, just a quick reminder, we are building a bubble chart, so I'll just go ahead and get started with my scatter chart here. And we want to make sure that the bubble represents a country, that the color represents the region, and that the size of the bubble shows population. So I am going to go ahead and start with my thinking about what's on the X and the Y axis. So on my Y axis, I'm going to have life expectancy. On the X axis, I'm going to have income. So I'm going to start there with life expectancy, and I am going to drag that where I know it needs to be. I am also going to drag income, and then we are going to look at this by country and also shaded by region. So I'm going to get country from name, and then for my legend, I'm going to use this World Bank region here, and I'll just drag that into the legend field, and I'm going to go ahead and rename this country. I'm going to rename this region, and now we have the beginnings of our bubble chart. We do need to make a few changes. The first thing that jumps out to me here is that we have one country that does not have an associated region. And so we're going to go ahead and remove this from the visualization. We can investigate what's going on with our data there, but typically if you have blanks that are showing up, you've got a mismatch somewhere in your data. So there are different ways to troubleshoot that. We're not going to get into that today. What we're going to do is just a blanket removing that, actually filtering it out from the whole report. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take this World Bank region, I am going to add it as a report level filter, and I'm going to filter out the blanks. All right, so this is looking more like it should. These colors are not the greatest. Let's go ahead and you have the opportunity to select the data colors here. You can do this manually one by one using hex codes or using just this color picker, but I'm going to go ahead and just select a whole entire color palette here, and I am going to do the high contrast palette just for the purposes of this demonstration. Okay, the one thing that you can see we're missing here is on our x-axis, we want to know the year. And the reason we need to add the year here is because, of course, we want to see this over time. So I'm going to go back to my field pane, and I am going to add the year into the play axis. which will give us here, this takes a moment to render, but this will give us our year. And then last but not least, there are a couple of different steps that we need to do. The first is that I am going to add in population in the size of the bubble. As you can see, these bubbles are all the same size right now, and it's difficult to see. So I'm going to add population to the size of the bubble. But if you remember what the data looked like, the population field here doesn't have any particular formatting applied. We could apply formatting if we wanted to, like, for example, adding a comma here. But one thing that I am interested in is I want to see the population in millions rather than just looking at the whole number here. So what I did was I created a measure here, and I just used a divide function. So I said divide the sum of the population by 1,000,000, and then if it is alternate result, I used a text value which is less than 1,000,000. So that's what I'm going to use in the visualization. So I'm actually going to drag population by million into the size, and you will see that that does then affect the size of the bubbles. This one takes a minute to render. And now the last thing that we want to adjust here is this data goes up to the year 2040, but for this visualization, I want to stop everything ending at 2021, so we're not looking into the future. So I'm going to make sure that I have a report level filter for data that is, this is not saved as a number at the moment, but we're going to do for data that is less than 2021. So I'm going to make sure that this is formatted as a whole number. It's going to ask me if I want to change the data type. I do. And I'm then going to have the opportunity to say when the value is less than or equal to 2021. I'm going to click Apply Filter. And then you can see this is looking more like what we need it to look like. Final step before we get to creating our overlay is that we want to make a custom tooltip. So you can see here that if you hover over any one of these bubbles, you will see the country, the region, the income, the life expectancy, so on and so forth. You'll see all the data that exists here within the visualization pane. So you'll see all the fields that are included in the visual, but it's not formatted in any way that might make the most sense to you. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a report page tooltip. So the first step is to jump in here to a blank page. We're going to jump to the formatting paint roller. We are going to call this page tooltip, and we're going to turn the tooltip on. We are then going to adjust the page size, and it's a really good starting place to just start with this tooltip page size. And then if you find that it doesn't work for you, you can always turn this into a custom size, and you can simply adjust the width and height. But it's really out of the box. It's nice to be able to just use the tooltip size. Now, in the example, I used a card visual to have the country name. So we will go with name here. It shows the first name, but that's okay. And in this case, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it country, and I'm going to turn off this category label. And then I used a multi-row card to show a few other values. So let's add in income, life expectancy, and population. And we're not going to spend too much time formatting this, but what I do want to show you is how to get this to show up as the tooltip. So if we jump back to our scatter plot or our bubble, let's actually rename this and call it bubble. If we jump back to our bubble, what you'll see here is if I click on the visual itself, I have the opportunity to, in the formatting paint roller, if you scroll all the way down to tooltip, you have the opportunity to turn this on or off. If you turn it on, I'm going to go ahead and set it to a report page tooltip, and I am going to set this to the page that I named Tooltip. Okay, now you can name it anything you want, do what makes sense to you, but what you'll notice, and this I find really cool, as you hover over the bubble, okay, the specific country shows up, because remember, it's pulling that field from dim country. All right, so the country itself shows up along with the custom formatting that you've added in the tooltip. Okay, so that's it for your Power BI report. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to build the custom overlay. If you participated in any of the past challenges, you may remember, and I can't remember if we've covered this explicitly, but we have done a couple of challenges where you've had to add a background, and we used PowerPoint for that background. But what we're going to do here is use PowerPoint for both our background, and this is our background here, and then we're going to use PowerPoint to create our overlay as well. So if you remember, with the background, we create the shapes that we want and the backgrounds to sit behind our visuals. You save that individual slide as a JPEG, and you then add that to your Power BI canvas. So what we're going to do here is we are going to take our Power BI report. We are going to take a screenshot of the report itself, and you want to make sure that you grab the whole canvas. You're going to jump back to your PowerPoint. And what you're going to do here is you're going to start to add the information that you know you need. And so if you remember here, we talked about, what each bubble represents. That color shows region. We show people that if they hover over a bubble, that it shows them the details about what's going on in that country, which region it belongs to. So you have the opportunity to add anything to your overlay. What we're going to do here is we're going to add an arrow pointing to the bubble, and we're going to add a text box. We're going to keep it simple. For the arrows, I didn't love any of the out-of-the-box arrows, so I went ahead and added a picture from the web. I think I searched for arrow. Maybe I searched for hand-drawn arrow. Curious to see what that's going to come up with. And this is the exact arrow that I used. So I don't like any of the shape arrows in PowerPoint, so I'm going to go ahead and add this baby. And I am going to point this directly at one of the bubbles. Okay, now you can then go back to Power BI. You can hover over the bubble itself. You can grab your screenshot, add that back into PowerPoint, and this is just a matter of playing around with things. All right, so I don't have this exact, and I'm not going to spend too much time messing around with it here, but what I do want to show is just that you can essentially add anything that you want here. Okay, this is your overlay. We will say that the color represents region and the size of the bubble represents population, and that each bubble is a country, and we wanted to start with that. So we'll start here. And I'm now going to go ahead and give this a background. And again, all of this formatting is completely up to you. We just want to make sure that we have something that explains what's going on in the data. And remember, the whole purpose of this overlay is that it makes the report make more sense to your readers. So we don't want to add anything that's going to confuse people. We want to make sure that we're helping our readers digest the information that we're giving them. Last but not least, we need a title here. And so I'm going to do a text box, And the title that we added was, how does income relate to life expectancy? And as one might imagine, as income increases, so does life expectancy. So I am going to go ahead and use the same font color that I used in my text box here. And I'm going to give this a white background. Make this a little bit bigger. And one thing you may notice is that I do have my grid lines showing here in PowerPoint, but I also had them on in Power BI. So just beware of that when you're doing screenshots. I'm now going to delete the screenshot or remove the screenshot that I took from the image itself. Okay, so now you have just the title, the text box, the arrow, whatever it is that you're trying to point out to your users. I'm going to save this. We're going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to save this particular slide as a JPEG. And I am going to call this Custom Overlay. We're going to export just this one. And let's just assume that we already have the background applied. We're going to jump back into PowerPoint. I am going to now insert a button. Okay, so now the rest of the magic here that we're going to do with our custom overlay happens with bookmarks and buttons. So there are actually, I think, a couple of different ways that you can do this, but I find this to be the easiest way. So on the Insert tab of the ribbon, and I'm going to expand this so I can see it, I'm going to insert a button, and I'm going to do a blank button. And you get this big box. And normally I remove this outline here, but in this case, it actually kind of works. So I'm going to leave it. And now I get these formatting options for my button. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take the fill here and turn it on. With my fill, I am going to add an image. And the image is going to be my custom overlay that we just created. And you'll see here that I get my title, I get my arrow that I just created. And again, look at this. The default always goes to something that you wouldn't expect. So I'm going to bring that down to, well, I guess it depends on what you want it to be. For the purposes of right now, let's just put it at, I don't know, 30%. It really depends on what you're trying to do. But what I do want to ensure is that you can see the visuals behind the overlay, and you can also see the overlay itself. Okay, so this is step one, is to add the image to your overlay. Step two now is to add the action. So what do you want to do when someone clicks on the button? Because remember, this is a button that we've added. So I'm going to turn the action on, and when someone clicks on the button, I want it to be a bookmark. But we haven't set those bookmarks up yet, so let's go ahead and do that. I am going to go to the View tab of the ribbon, and I am going to turn two things on, and these are really important. They help me make sense of things. So I'm going to turn the bookmarks pane on and the selection pane. So what you can see here in the selection pane is I don't have any bookmarks yet, and I have the ability to show and hide the two visuals that exist on the page. So one is my bubble chart, and you can rename these if you so choose by double clicking on them. And let's call this bubble chart. And the other is the button. This tab order here, I'm sure Megan will teach us about soon, and that helps with the way that screen readers navigate through the tabs. But I'm going to go ahead here and set up my first bookmark. So the way I like to do this is I like to set up a naming schema that makes sense. So we're going to add two bookmarks, and the first one is going to be where the button is showing, but you click the button in order to see the visual. Okay, and so I am going to call this overlay. So the overlay is showing. And you know what? We'll just say overlay showing. Great. Okay, and with the overlay showing, you see the bubble chart and you see the button. Okay, I am going to then add a second bookmark. And in my second bookmark, I don't want the overlay to show. And so you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and rename this button, and I'm gonna call this overlay, just again, to keep things making sense, particularly if you're collaborating with other people. Okay, and in my second bookmark, I'm gonna hide this overlay. Now, it's really important you go to these three little dots, the ellipses, and you update the bookmark. Okay, let's go ahead and rename this, and this is going to be, I don't know, we'll call it report page. And now if you toggle between the two, you'll see the overlay showing and the report page. Okay, so you're able to see what is being hidden and what is not hidden. So it's really important to keep this selection pane turned on. Now, if we go back to our overlay showing, we click on the button, we go to the action, and we set this as a bookmark where the bookmark is, and remember, a bookmark is like, where in the report do you want it to go? What kind of snapshot do you want it to show? And we want this to go to the report page. Okay, so now to test this in Power BI Desktop, you must push down the Control key in order to make it work. Okay, now another thing that we can do is add a button so that we can go back to the overlay. So we're gonna go back to Insert, we're gonna add a button. I'm gonna add a Help button here. In the demo that I posted, I did this with, I actually created the icon in PowerPoint, but you can do it either way. We're gonna go back, we're gonna add an action. Now again, we're gonna do the same thing. It is a bookmark because we've already set both of these up. The bookmark is the overlay showing. The tooltip, I'm gonna say, click here for more info. And again, you can make this say whatever you want, but we wanna just make it make sense. And now what you can see is if we hold down the Control button and we click on the question mark, it takes us back to the overlay. Okay, so what we've done here is we have used bookmarks and buttons to create a custom overlay for our moving bubble chart. If you made it through to the end this week, you should be really proud of yourselves. We have created a custom overlay. We have built my most favorite visualization that exists, and this really is one of the first data visualizations that got me started in my public health journey and made me really interested in data viz. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I hope that everyone learned something here today, and we hope that you will join us for next week, week 14, which will be brought to us by Megan Longoria. So thanks so much and have a good one.